Hey guys, Joel's coming at you with another reasoning session talking about how we are born for such a time as this, but it's not just going to fall into our laps. We have to do the work in the causal realm, and from there the physical manifestations will unfold and bring us the very outcome that we have desired.
Come now and let us reason together. Come now, we can talk it over.
So if you like these videos, give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe for more like content, because honestly this message is accelerating and it's coming out faster really than I can keep up with it. I'm honestly making videos like this every day, and sources aligning those of us with hearts to understand and receive this message with actually finding it. So no matter what YouTube and other big tech platforms do to try and censor me, they can't succeed, because this message is getting out there and it's reaching the people that it needs to in this specific time. So you can also check me out on some of the platforms listed below. But with that, I'm going to get right into the text. Today I'm going to be talking about Haman and how he faced justice when he tried to annihilate the whole race of Jews that were living throughout the Achaemenid Empire. But while a lot of us are actually familiar with his fate, in that he and his sons were hung on the very gallows they prepared for Mordecai, we might not really be aware of the events that led up to this. So we see that at the beginning of the story, Haman walks through the city and everybody's forced to bow to him. And this was basically a Persian tradition when people would just bow and recognize the sovereignty of whoever the leader was. But Mordecai, being a Jew, refused to do this because he only acknowledged Yahweh, or source of all things, as the actual source of all things. You know, Haman or any of these other dignitaries didn't really do anything for him in the way that Source literally created his awareness. So he refused to bow. And of course, Haman took this personally, and he basically formed an edict that all Jews throughout the empire were to be annihilated. Now, when Mordecai learned this, he basically put on sackcloth and started wailing loudly. And he even made a show of this in front of the king's gate, but nobody could enter the courts of the king while they were wearing sackcloth. But he caused the Jews around to realize what was going on, and they all joined him because their entire race was at stake here. And Esther, who is the queen, who is actually his niece, was made aware of this, and she said, you know what, this is not right. And she actually sent him good clothes and said, you know, here, put this on, stop crying. But he said, don't you know what's going on? Tell the king what's going on so that he can fix it. And she said, you know what, there's these 30 days that I'm not allowed to go into the king's court. But then Mordecai told her literally what I say all the time, because it's fitting for us in our present day, dealing with what we're dealing with in the world today. Think not with yourself that you will escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. So in other words, don't think that you're going to get off easily just because you're in the king's house. For if you altogether hold your peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether you are come to the kingdom for such a time as this. So Esther herself fasts for 3 days and 3 nights in preparation to go and meet the king, even though she's not summoned. And the thing is that if you weren't summoned and you went in before the king, you were done for. So her literal life was at stake here, kind of either way, but she fasted and prepared and made sure that she got in tune with Source before she went in and did the physical work. And so finally, when she actually went in to meet the king, it was so when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, what will you, Queen Esther? And what is your request? It shall be even given you to half of the kingdom. So Esther calls the king to a banquet with Haman. They meet and she says, you know what, not today, but tomorrow I'm going to tell you. So just come again to a banquet tomorrow and I'll let you know. That same night, Haman goes home and he's infuriated with Mordecai, who continues not to bow to him. So his wife says, build the gallows. So he gets these gallows to be built specifically for Mordecai. But ironically, that very night, the king couldn't sleep. And so he gets his servants to read him the chronicles of the kingdom. And what do they find? They find that Mordecai actually saved the king's life from 2 conspirators that were planning to overthrow the king. And the king says, well, what did we do to honor Mordecai? And they said, nothing. So he calls Haman in and he says, "What should I do for the man whom the king wishes to honor?" And Haman, thinking it was for himself, says, "Let the royal apparel be brought which the king used to wear, and the horse that the king rides upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man with all whom the king delights to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." And the king said to Haman, "Make haste, and take the apparel and the horse, as you have said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew." So now Haman was bound, and he had to do this to the very guy that he was planning to kill. So that was the first manifestation that something that Esther did in the causal realm actually manifested through to the physical realm. But the real solution is still yet to come, because on the second night of the banquet, Esther tells the king what Haman was planning to do. And Haman didn't even know that the queen was Jewish. But all of a sudden, the king's infuriated and Haman's very life is at stake. So he pleads with Esther, and the king comes in right as he was assaulting her in his fervor. And the king says, "Will you assault the queen right in my own house?" So as the king said this, they bagged his face and took him out and hung him on the very gallows he prepared for Mordecai. But the story doesn't end there, because the Jews were still facing annihilation because the law was in effect. And once the law was in effect, it couldn't be reversed. So the king passed another law enabling the Jews to defend themselves, and they had to fight back. And on this day, the 13th of Hadar, they made it a day of feasting and gladness because they overtook their enemies and they actually succeeded. So the war wasn't won just because Haman hung. They had to enforce the law and actually fight back against the enemy that was still coming against them. And yes, they were successful because Esther had done the work in the causal realm through those 3 days of fasting. That's the whole crux of the story. She was born for such a time as that, but it wasn't just making the king aware that she was Jewish and her people faced annihilation. It was because she did work in the causal realm that paved the way for the king to receive that message and actually look at her with favor. It's not going to come struggling with the physical realm, but once we pave the way in the causal realm, the physical realm has no other option but to conform with the blueprint set out in that higher dimension. So, do your part. We're all come here for such a time as this, and we all have our own talents and our own destiny. We know we've come here to live a life of fulfillment, not a life of manipulation and harassment, either physically or mentally, emotionally, even spiritually. Source has a plan for all of us that transcends what institution has been feeding us all along. So we have to tap into that, and from there we'll actually open the door to our destiny, which has already been preordained for us because we already have these desires in our heart, but we have to act on them. And that's when we can literally eat some hamantaschen. You can check that recipe out up here. Link to my other channel where I just post other vegan recipes. They're pretty amazing, so check that out if you like. But yeah, literally celebrating in the very fact that the guy that set out to destroy us has ironically been served his own justice. He's not alive to eat his hat, so we've got to eat it in celebration for him. So get in tune with Source, do the inner work, pave the way in the causal dimension, and then you'll start to reap the beginning of that harvest in the physical realm. Not just for yourself, but for all of us, for all of society as we move forward, downloading the kingdom of heaven into this earth plane. So I love you guys from the bottom of my heart. I really do. Stay optimistic because times are changing, but we have to change them from the realms that actually make the difference. I'll check you in the next reasoning sesh. Joel signing out once again. Agape, Salaam, Namaste, Shalom.